Good evening. Welcome to the What Are You Sporting About conversation starter on the state of justice in America. I am your host, Savania DeBarros, the protector of athletes. I am also the founder of the SL DeBarros Law Firm, where we serve 6- and 7-figure business owners and athletes in business by motivating, educating, and guiding them to their next level through legal representation in business, employment, sports, and entertainment. I am also the best-selling author of What Are You Sporting About, which actually inspired the podcast with the same name, What Are You Sporting About? I'm also the author of JoJo Learns About Voting, which released this last November of 2020. And that is the second publication of JoJo's Legal Adventures, which is a children's book series platform designed to take legal nuggets and introduce them to children in a context that their little minds can understand. So tonight, we have an esteemed panel to discuss the state of justice in America. So joining me tonight, welcome to the floor, and this is not in any particular order, Dr. Shaniqua Jones. Dr. Shaniqua Jones completed her doctoral degree in interdisciplinary leadership with a specialization in higher education in May of 2016. She also used her collection of experiences as the Restorative Justice Coordinator, the Dean of Students at Chicago Collegiate Charter School, and as a foundation for her restorative justice training that she provides to churches, schools, community organizations, the Cook County Southlands Juvenile Justice Council, and the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice. So currently, Dr. Jones is the coordinator of the Restorative Justice and Restorative Practices with Thornton Township High School District in, I think it's High School District of 205. And she is the founder of Purple Path. Dr. Jones has been able to continue educating and serving students, parents or guardians, educators, and more through her restorative justice one-on-one courses offered online. Welcome to the panel today, Dr. Jones. We also have Miss Elizabeth Leiba, who is the founder of Black History and Culture Academy and Social Justice Warrior. She's also the co-host of the Ed Up Experience podcast. She's a published writer for the Sun Centennial newspaper and was the editor of the Seminole Tribune newspaper for several years. Her most recent writing includes an op-ed piece on racial profiling for CNN, and she was featured in a New York Times article about social justice advocacy work. She's also an English professor with more than 10 years experience teaching face-to-face using a flipped student-centered classroom and online using learning management systems like Blackboard and D2L. Welcome to the panel tonight, Ms. Leiba. We also have joining us Pastor Kevin Thorpe, who is also a former candidate for Alachua County City Commission in Gainesville, Florida. He's the senior pastor of Faith Church in Gainesville, Florida. Welcome to the panel tonight. I am so honored that you all have found the time actually to join me in such a short period of time. And it absolutely means a lot to me. So we know we have a lot of things happening in our communities and in this nation, period. And so you guys took the time to come here and share some words with the citizens of the US today. So I am sharing something that I want you guys to pay attention to. So last Wednesday, an attack on the Capitol occurred and people were surprised. Officers were put at risk and others welcomed it. At least that's what it appeared to show. Photos showed officers allowing rioters to enter the Capitol, rioters and terrorists writing on folders that we will not back down, nameplates torn off walls, and guards being chased by mobs. Essentially, the pictures that we saw streaming on the news media throughout the country and the world looked like something in an entire different country. The chaos that erupted had people asking why and how did this happen? It had world leaders calling on America to exhibit the beliefs and ideals of justice, democracy, and equality. It had African Americans quickly realizing the stark difference between their peaceful protests and the mob depicted on Wednesday night, and how the racism of America is easy and eager to denounce one group of people, yet allow others to run rampant. Many have said that this is not who we are, yet it is exactly who and what America is. America was founded on the backs of African Americans, and the years of terror, murder, imprisonment, and lack of justice continues to illustrate that fact. So my first question for the panel tonight is, what are you sporting for in the face of justice? And let me back up for a second, because is it even possible to actually sport for justice? Who wants to answer that question? And before you guys go, Attorney Boykin actually joined us here live, so I'm going to put you on the screen. Welcome to the panel. How are you tonight?
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be a part of the August panel that you've assembled here, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. So Attorney Richard Boykin is a former Cook County Board of Commissioner in District 1, and he assumed office in 2014 and left in 2018. And he's also the former candidate for Cook County Clerk of Circuit Court in Illinois. So like I said, an esteemed panel here, and I'm so glad that you guys took the time out of your schedule to join us. So while you're thinking about that question, I want to show you some depictions of the stark difference between Black and brown protesters as it relates to the mob that erupted on the Capitol last Wednesday. So this is a photo taken from CNN where police in Seattle are clearing protesters with flash bombs. That's the first photo that you guys see. This photo is provided by The Guardian, and these are all of the officers, armed officers, who were waiting for Black and brown protesters as people gathered to protest from the George Floyd murder. This is what we saw across the news everywhere, right? People climbing walls. Like, I don't know if you guys remember this, but if you remember the Berlin Wall, how people were trying to tear that wall down because it replicated some horrible things and racial inequality, so many different things over there. This when I saw this, it reminded me of that. Then we saw this, all right? White mob is inside of the Capitol. Hardly anyone outside to stop them from gaining entrance. Hardly anyone outside to actually protect the Capitol. And when they got inside, there's really nothing that those officers could have done, right? So we saw pictures of them in different lawmakers' offices, writing on their notepads, swinging around in their chairs as if this was just a place to hang out. So this is the cover of The Guardian website, and they show the difference between supporters for Trump and those who presented to protest based on the murder of George Floyd. So on the left, here are all of the guards that were waiting for Black and brown protesters. And here is a photo of how enraged these individuals were supporting Donald Trump. So I'm going to ask you guys again, I'm going to pose this to the entire panel. Is it even possible for us to continue sporting for justice? Has hope gone awry? Is there anything that we can do to actually reach and gain equality of justice in this America, in this country, for Black and brown people?
I think so. I think we have to continue to press for a more perfect union. I think that, look, we've been fighting for more than 400 years, trying to get equity and justice and fairness. I think what you see, though, amplified in what happened at the Capitol, where I worked for 13 years, is you see two Americas. you see one America where, I mean, police basically acquiesced to this mob. I mean, there were police who actually opened up the gates and welcomed them in. There were some police who tried to stop them. And I have a tremendous amount of affinity for the Capitol Hill police, whom I worked with for a number of years. And they are trained, well-trained force. But obviously, some of them supported these individuals who wanted to mount an insurrection against our government. And so, quite frankly, that should have been stopped. There's no way they should have ever reached the Capitol steps. And we've had a number of demonstrations in Washington. So this is not something that's new in Washington. In fact, they were aware of the fact that these individuals would try to breach the Capitol. I mean, we got the best, most sophisticated technology in the world. And so the FBI, Homeland Security, all of these agencies, they saw the chatter, they knew about it. Obviously, President Trump riled them up and got them inspired so that they could go do that. But the police opened the front door to the people's house and allowed them to desecrate the people's house. So those folks ought to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No question about it. And we got to continue to press for justice. Look, I don't care whether it's Black Lives Matter or whomever. The reality of it is that nobody should be able to desecrate the people's house. And we got to have justice in this country. And I think that what you're seeing right now is a yearning for that justice. Obviously, you see two stark Americas, one for African Americans and one for whites with privilege. That has to change. And I think there are white people of good conscience and goodwill who want to see us come together and form that more perfect union that's established, that's talked about in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence.
No, that was well put, because, and you're right, there is a stark difference, and it shows us that America absolutely does have a double standard. A fabric of America was built, like I said, on the backs of African slaves, you know, so we know that that type of behavior is not going to change overnight. However, it feels as though it's taken us right back over the last few years to what I would say my great grandparents have had to deal with. You know, things may look different, but it still seems and appears to mimic the types of injustice and double standard and lack of justice in America that older generations have experienced for years here. So my question to piggyback off of Attorney Boykin, and this question goes for Dr. Jones, if we're pressing towards justice and a way to find peace, is it possible for the nation at large to be restored? Is it possible for African Americans who have been protesting for so long, who have been brandished as thugs and rioters instead of actual protesters looking for equality, is it possible for the Black nation to also heal?
Thank you for that question. As I continue to delve into the work that I do, I question this every day, because I am a restorative justice practitioner. I've been able to, speak to thousands of people, especially our Black and brown youth. And as an educator, these are some of the conversations, and I wish more people were privy to the conversations that I'm having with high schoolers in regards to the way they are experiencing life in the midst of racial unrest and the impact of COVID. And so to your point, I do believe there's a way for us to heal. I do believe in the power of healing. I also believe in the power of accountability and how to build community and build competencies and build social capital and be able to have community safety and community resources. And it starts within. As a mom of 5, these are conversations I'm having with my own children. And then because they are my children, their friends become my children, and then their parents. And so how do, right now is the time, if not ever before, we have an opportunity to reimagine what education looked like. Prior to COVID, I've seen the injustices of where many of the children that I serve did not have access to internet. They did not have access to quality electronics. And so as a college professor, I see the downfall of not having access to that early on, to those resources that are now they were deemed a luxury at some point, but now they're a necessity. And so I'll say all that to say that the way things have happened in terms of from March of last year up until present day, in conjunction with COVID-19 and racial unrest, our children have been able to benefit in ways that they haven't been able to benefit before. And it's unfortunate. But if I'm thinking in terms of how we can heal and how we can restore and how we can rehumanize those who have been dehumanized and go on this healing journey together, I believe that it's possible. And it starts within, it starts in the home. It starts with, as a mom, I've learned how to apologize to my children. I wasn't raised that way. I was raised, I was to be seen and not heard. And even if your gut tells you that something is wrong, you don't have a voice. And so how do we, one of the things I'm always questioning our leaders, our parents, our guardians, big brothers and big sisters is how can we teach our children to effectively use their voice if we're not giving them the opportunity to do so? And so it's about understanding the differences between climates and cultures, about understanding how we can reimagine. I call it the 4 R's. I call it restore humanity. I call it radical love, reciprocity, and reimagine education. And with those 4 R's, I believe we are able to do anything we can do, need to do.
Thank you so much for that conversation, because I can't speak for any other ethnic group in this country, but for Black people, we have a different conversation when it comes to our little ones, right? We grew up hearing certain conversations. We grew up knowing that we had to do this and we had to do that, or we had to walk this way or not sit that way or what have you. But are other people actually having these conversations with their children who don't look like us, who don't come from their communities, who are probably not educated in the same school districts that we are? What are the things that they're being educated with? Because you're right, education does come in so many different forms, but how is that really showing up in this country when you can have the younger generation, doing things that you would have thought that would have been left in the history books, right? So are other people actually having these conversations? I appeared on a podcast last week, and the podcast host said to me, she said, those are not Republicans. And I looked at her and I'm like, well, how are they not Republicans? Because they're calling themselves Republicans. You know what I mean? And so even from her perspective, as a white woman in this country, they don't represent the overarching community of white people who identify as the Republican Party. So how are we to know who they are? Like, what does their education look like? Because as Black people, we carry a particular stereotype that has branded our culture and our community for so long that it has reared itself into the education that we actually teach our children, because we don't want them to be mistaken for something. We don't want them to, for example, be a little kid like Tamir Rice and gunned down in the park just for playing with a toy gun. You know what I'm saying? So it's little things like that. Education, is so important, but if the other side isn't coming to the table with actually properly educating their offspring about race and justice and equality in this country, will it do us some good? Will we make any headway? So I want to pose a question to Ms. Leiba, because race in this country, and we all know it's been a huge issue. And in fact, you actually shared a story in your article, which was shared on CNN's platform, called "The Story I Had to Share After Kyle Rittenhouse Posted His $2 million Bill." So for those who don't know or remember who Kyle Rittenhouse, this was the white, I'm going to say white man, okay, who killed Black people in Wisconsin when people were protesting. All right. So Leiba, I want to know from your perspective, what was it that made you have to share that story with people and how it still relates to now, 2020 and 2021. What lessons can or has your experience taught you, and what can it teach other non-Black and Brown people about social unfairness and social justice unrest?
It's a really good question. I would say I've been very active on social media over the past year since George Floyd's murder and really trying to be vocal. Like Dr. Jones, I am an educator. I've been working in higher education for 20 years. In the past 10, I've been a faculty member. I've also worked in K through 12. And education is very lacking when it comes to being honest about the history of our country. So you have a whole 2 generations of people in the dominant culture that are willfully ignorant about the foundation of the history of our country, the racist history of our country. They don't know about the founding fathers. They don't know about the enslavement of Africans in this country. They don't know about segregation, separate but equal. They don't know about redlining. They're totally oblivious. And when they see Black folk in certain minoritized, marginalized situations, they're very unsympathetic because they feel as though, well, you're just being lazy, or you don't want it bad enough, or maybe you should just go to college. But somebody that's worked in K through 12 and worked in career colleges and community colleges with mostly marginalized, minoritized students, first generation students, a lot of them are not prepared for college. And we have a whole generation, 2-3 generations of Black folk in this country that have not been able to close the wealth gap. We're actually worse off than we were in the 50s in terms of the wealth gap. We're not making the same amount as our white counterparts. I just started to be really vocal in speaking about all those inequities that I saw and presenting statistics as I would in the classroom to support my observations about how there is too much disparity in policing, education, in healthcare, in mental health services, in COVID, anything that you could think of that's happening in this country. Black folk are the most marginalized population. Maternal outcomes in terms of our children being born, the survival rate of our newborns when we go into a hospital. So I started being really vocal. And then after I saw that, all over social media, talking about the bail that was posted, how Ricky Schroeder and the inventor of the My Pillow got together and they crowdfunded $2 million so that Kyle Rittenhouse could be released on bond after shooting 2 people in the face with an AR-15. I was horrified by that, by a 17-year-old being lauded as a hero after being charged with murder and admitting that he killed. That was not in question, but he said it was self-defense. The AR-15 was purchased illegally. It was purchased by a 19-year-old. He's not old enough to even own a gun. And a lot of people defended him, said he was self-defense. He was there to help so that the Black Lives Matter protesters wouldn't overrun Kenosha, Wisconsin after the Jacob Blake shooting happened. So I was really disturbed by that. And I posted about it on LinkedIn because of the fact that I had been arrested at the age of 19. I was arrested in Gainesville, Florida, because I was an undergraduate student at University of Florida. And I went to an Eckerd Drugs and I had a pack of $2.49 pack of batteries in my book bag. And I was accosted by loss prevention. And even though I had the receipt, I flustered at the moment, could not find that receipt. And they called the police and they took me to jail in Gainesville. And I was really triggered. I think Bernice King posted on Twitter that Khalif Browder was in Rikers Island for 4 years for stealing a book bag, which later it was found that he was exonerated after the fact, but he committed suicide, that he did not steal this book bag. That was not true. And it triggered me because I thought about my book bag. The fact that I had a $2.49 pack of batteries, $3 pack of batteries in my book bag. And because I rifled through and could not find the receipt, I had purchased it like 2 days before I went in there to drop off some film and had not even purchased anything. So I knew that I kept pleading with them. What, can you go look at the tapes? Can you, just telling them I was a student, telling them, would never steal a $3 item. And even my lawyer, the Gainesville lawyer, said, this is so out of the ordinary. Usually they would never do that. They have to witness you steal it. You have to have left the store. There were so many things in their own company policy that my lawyer pulled from, and they dropped the charges. They did not pursue legal action against me, but I did have to post bail. I was incarcerated. I was in jail until my parents posted bond. And I thought, wow, what a difference. As a 19-year-old, I was guilty before innocent. And this 17-year-old is innocent because he's a hero. He was there protecting. He got bottled water. He was walking with his AR-15 slung across his shoulder. And the unfairness of how our Black and brown children are racially profiled really struck me. And CNN reached out to me and they saw that post on LinkedIn and they asked me to write an op-ed piece. That piece went viral. It was on their website. It got 2 million hits. I got over 100 emails at my work email, a lot of them very racist, blatantly racist, telling me go back to Africa, telling me don't criticize our country. It was very hard to process that because I'm a parent. I have a 22-year-old myself, and a lot of people were saying, you're just, you have it out for this kid, and I would never have it. I'm a parent myself. Why would I have it out for a teenager? But if you're going to treat a child from the dominant culture or any culture, you should not treat one unfairly. And our children, like Tamir Rice, are shot on sight. Our children, Trayvon Martin, have a pack of Skittles and they don't get a second chance. Nobody ushers them past. Nobody does like Dylan Roof and gets them Burger King after they've mowed down nine peaceful churchgoers. And you get McDonald's or Burger King and a bulletproof vest and a bottle of water while you sit there in the back of not a scratch on you, but our children are being laid to rest in a coffin before they've even reached adulthood. And I felt like that was very unfair, which made me want to speak out about that.
It's so true. And I'm sure everyone can attest to the moments of being preached to by a parent that you have to work 3 times as hard, you have to be 3 times better, because you don't want the worst to happen. Parents are afraid of their children driving long distances or staying out too late because you don't know what can happen. We can look at someone like Sandra Bland just going about her day and not here anymore, because she was put in custody of someone who actually swore to serve and protect. When I read your story, Liz, it reminded me of a situation I went through in college. And I was in Tampa at the time by myself. I didn't have anyone there. And I was driving down the road the exact same way that I normally always go, because I'm not from Tampa, so I don't want to be lost. I don't want to get lost, right? And this particular day on the same street, there were cars in front of me who officers allowed to continue on their way. But when they came to my car, they stopped me. And my question was, well, why did you stop me? And the officer rudely told me, well, this is a crime scene. I said, well, if it's a crime scene, why haven't you guys put cones out? So of course that upset them. And he flagged me over to a side parking lot. And at the time, I only had like the little flip phone where you have to buy the minutes and everything. So I was able to call a friend really quick because I just felt like something was about to go down. So at that moment, I became so upset because I knew, I'm like, well, I have not broken the law, right? This is the exact same way that I go home from class every day. And the officer came over, very rude, upset with me, and asked me to get out of my car. I got out of my car. A white female officer also came over, and the question was basically, why wasn't I following the directions? And my statement was, well, you guys allowed all these other cars to go in front of me. I don't understand why I'm being pulled over, and you didn't do your job to put out cones to signify to other people that they may need to go a different route. So why is that my problem? Well, to not beat a dead horse, that ended up with me in the back of the police car. Glad that I had called my friend because someone was there to see everything that was happening. And this young girl, undergraduate student, a lover of law, I knew what my rights were. And I told him, as a matter of fact, I said, I hope, and I'm screaming because you can't hardly hear anything through those cop windows. I said, I hope you're ready to tell the judge why you just arrested a college student without probable cause. And I was so scared, but he let me out of the car. Goes back to what Dr. Jones said, education is important. So what exactly are we teaching our children? Because we can teach them all the ways to walk straight or, be respectful, but what about your legal rights? Do you know exactly what your rights are? Because in America, unfortunately, there is two sides of America. Like you explained, a 17-year-old white boy can walk right past officers with an assault rifle, murder people, and never be considered a suspect. But what is it about us? What is it about our color? What is it about our stature? What is it about our mental capabilities that threaten them? I want to pose that question to you, Pastor Thorpe.
Well, these are unprecedented times, not because people's hearts are different from what they have been in recent decades, but because it's being revealed. We're seeing it play out in real time. Several years ago, one of the most effective things that I did that was impactful for me was reading Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, because what it undid for me was a level of trust that I had developed in at least the highest levels of the judiciary. Even with the election of Donald Trump, the backstop that I thought we would have had would have been the court system, the Senate, and the House. That was an unfortunate assumption. Of course, in Michelle Alexander's book, she deals a lot with how things like no-knock warrants have been upheld by the Supreme Court repeatedly. Illegal searches and seizures, maintaining people's property, even when no one was convicted of a crime. I mean, just insanity. But that really brought home to me the reality of what our country has become. And then I've often encouraged people, if they haven't read the book, to at least watch the documentary 13th on Netflix. Because we've got to be honest about the fact that politically, in recent decades, certainly starting near the Nixon administration, people of color who also served in elected office, when the crack epidemic hit, they played a very significant role in assisting the turning of America in accepting the incarceration of Black and brown people. The idea that crack was responded to with the war on drugs, yet we refer to the opioid epidemic. Still drugs, still drug dealing, but the idea that one could be treated as a war and the other treated as a sickness lends itself drastically to where we have moved as a country. It is unfortunate that people of color, and I say this frankly, for two reasons. I've been Black now for 47 years, and I'm in this is my 23rd year of pastoring a church. People of color, of goodwill, and people of faith have worked to convince their African American constituents that America had gotten better, only for us to discover that we have not gotten better, that the underpinnings of what brought us to be the nation that we are, a nation that would enslave human beings. And once slavery was outlawed, certainly it had a lot to do with the politics of that day, but then it persisted with Jim Crow. It persisted with mass incarceration. It continues to persist with the dilemmas that we find ourselves in now. So those things are real, and I do not think they're going to change, quite frankly. I am not a hopeless person. I am very hopeful. I'm hopeful for humanity, but I do not have a whole lot of faith in America being able to deliver itself from the state that we find ourselves in. The next few weeks and months are going to be quite telling, because we're going to see how the Senate and the Congress, and I don't speak about those bodies of the legislative branch in disconnected ways. The fact that these folks were elected by states to represent those states, and the fact that we just watched our country and bigots and racist people within our country turn them over. Because this was not only, and last Wednesday was not only an assault on the people's house. Folks in law enforcement, especially those whose responsibility it was to protect the people's house, turn the people over to the people. That means that those who are responsible for passing and the execution of laws were literally put at risk themselves. And we're going to discover where the heart of America is if the House and the Senate, you think about not only that branch of government, but you had the legislative branch and the executive branch. The vice president was present that day on the Senate floor. And the idea that he was one of the main people they were seeking when they entered the Capitol. How will this country respond? Is our leadership so committed to what they call a way of life until they're willing to physically sacrifice themselves, to put their families in jeopardy of grieving their loss for the protection of what? What American value is it that you are trying to protect to such an extent that you will literally die on behalf of that ideal? So we're at a critical place. But I will say this one thing, and this came to me today because I, quite frankly, again, a person of faith, I found myself in a place of despair, wondering whether or not we could come out of the hole that we are in. And here's the conclusion that I received. I am not going to give up on America because there are too many people that I love who are stuck here, who are literally living in this country. And I can't give up on the country because I'm not going to give up on them. They need to be protected.
There's so much that you just gave us. So much. I mean, great nuggets, great nuggets. There is a long way that we have to go. And you're right. We've seen that the progress that we thought we made, we actually have not made that progress. But I want to bring out some of the issues that you brought up. So you brought up the no-knock rules and how those rules have been upheld for so long. And one of the people we lost recently because of that is Brianna Taylor, right? And so because of all the stuff that was going on in 2020 pandemic, George Floyd had gotten so much media attention. Her name had not really been in the media. And then this chant of say her name, really hit the media floor, and people were marching and demanding that we recognize who she is because of that no-knock rule, right? So we know that also took place. Then you also talked about narrative changing, always changing the narrative about what something is, making a delineation between whatever affects Black people, it's the worst. But whatever affects white people, we need to huddle together and find a way, some type of mechanisms that will get them back on the right playing field. So that brings me to a question that I have about Colin Kaepernick. So keeping in with what this platform is about, what he's sporting about, Colin Kaepernick is a former professional football player, and a lot of people know his name as a social justice advocate, but he decided a long time ago that he was not going to stand for a flag that did not represent Black and brown people, period, right? And a lot of athletes were so afraid to follow his lead for a number of reasons. You know, they don't want to lose their contracts, they don't want to get kicked off the team, be unemployed, and probably suffer being, left out of sports for a while because maybe no other team would actually take a crack at them because of that, right? And Trump changed the narrative. You're disrespecting our flag. And then you have all of these people who join the bandwagon and changes the entire point of what Kaepernick was doing to gain the attention of you're disrespecting our flag, right? A lot of people didn't stand by him. And sometimes, and we've seen this through history, a lot of things that are right, that stands for justice and equality, it doesn't feel good in the moment. It's you are not a trendsetter in that moment. You are just someone who's disrupting what the entire community or nation has been about. And a lot of people don't like change. It just doesn't feel comfortable to them, right? So you see a football player, and we've all heard before, well, shut up and dribble, because what do you know about race relations? What do you know about equality? What do you know about social justice? You're millionaires. Just shut up. All you're good for is actually playing a sport. So now that we've seen all of this stuff erupting over the last 4 years, it's not like it didn't happen overnight. Have people waited too late to support something like what Kaepernick did? Have people waited too late to join the social justice advocates in different communities to actually stand up for what's right and say, look, no one is going to take this anymore? Have our policymakers waited too late? A lot of people now are trying to jump ship and distance themselves from what just happened last Wednesday. But what about what happened at the Capitol in Michigan? That was equally dangerous and threatened someone's life, and a political official at that. So are people waiting too late until the fire is too close to them and they don't want to get burnt? Can someone answer that question? Are people waiting too late to stand up and say, we have to make a change now? Or are they just going to wait to avoid the flames because it's getting too hot for them? So almost kind of like how we say, if you can't stand the heat, stay out the kitchen, right? So we elect our officials, and I'm going to pose it like this, because we elect officials hopefully to make the decisions that are in the best interest of the public, right? And sometimes when you hold political offices, you can't make everyone happy, but the hope is that the person who actually occupy that seat will make the best decision at large for their community, and not their community in, I'm white, so I'm going to make this decision for white people, or I'm Black, I'm going to make this decision for Black people. No, what means can I put into my role? Can I give to the community that will help everyone at large to be better, to receive better, to have the same opportunities or better opportunities than what they have, to have equal resources, because that's something that we don't have now. So what are some things that political officials could have done to stop a lot of this, even just going back to the rhetoric of you're disrespecting the flag, because that's not what it was?
Well, let me answer the question. I don't think that people are waiting too late. I think that as long as we have breath in our body, And as long as God gives us another day, it's never too late to do the right thing. And I'll also say this, that Colin Kaepernick, he found something that Dr. King said for which he was willing to lay down his life for. He found a purpose in life. Although he was a major sports figure, he found a purpose and he decided to take a stand. And for that, I'm grateful. Others stood with him. And, you know, the civil rights movement, when it began, it didn't begin with a majority of people. It began with a focused minority of people. When it got sexy, people jumped on board. They said, hey, now is the time. But I'll say this, I'm very hopeful for our country. I believe that we'll come together. I think that there's a tremendous opportunity. And I don't want to minimize the strides that have been made in the past. I mean, we've made tremendous strides since coming to the shores of Jamestown, Virginia on slave ships. African Americans have made tremendous strides. Look at what happened in Georgia. The first time in the history of that state, you have an African American elected statewide in Georgia. Unbelievable. Georgia, a Republican state. You know, folks came out and voted for him overwhelmingly, and he won the Senate seat. And so now you got the Senate in the hands of Democrats, you got the House in the hands of Democrats, and you got the presidency in the hands of Democrats. Now the question becomes, what will they do with all of that power? And what will we do as people? Will we hold them accountable? We had a black president. Did we hold him accountable, or did we give him a pass? I mean, that becomes the question. And so we got to hold people accountable who are in policy making positions, who are in leadership positions, but we also have to be accountable ourselves. We have to be true to our own self. We have to look in the mirror and say, am I doing everything that I can to make America the best place that it can possibly be? Am I doing everything that I can to make sure that the next generation will have a better life than we have? And so that's what we have to do. I mean, and you know, somebody talked about it, but COVID and all the disparities and all of that, this stuff has been happening since we got to America. It's nothing new. But the thing is, COVID uncovered it, so to speak. And of course, you see the tremendous gulf between income inequality, prison reform and stuff like that. You see the tremendousness of it, and it impacts all of us. But we got a lot of black politicians who are in positions all throughout the country and state capitals who can do something about this. And we got to hold them accountable as African Americans. We can't give people a pass just because they look like us. I mean, we'll hold white folks accountable, but we won't hold ourselves accountable. Look at what's happening in Chicago. Look at how many people are being slaughtered in the streets every day on the weekend. Look at how many black folks are being shot by black folks. I called it genocide. People laughed at me. I called it genocide years ago. I'm on the record as saying there's genocide taking place here in Chicago. People say, oh, Boykin, you full of it. Don't worry about it. So the reality of it is that we got a lot of progress that we've made. We've taken a couple of steps back too. And so we got to figure out, how do we continue to march forward? And America will never be the America that it ought to be until African Americans reach the equity stage that we need to reach. Look, I mean, you have Latinos, Hispanics who are doing better than African Americans in terms of income, in terms of other areas of quality of life indicators. That is unacceptable. I mean, African Americans have tremendous power, and we got to use our power. And that's what we got to do. We got to unify. In unity, there is strength. And I think if, the key is that the enemy seeks to divide us, seeks to keep us apart, seeks to continue to have us destroy each other from within. And so we got to stop that. We got to put an end to that. And we got to figure out, how do we come together? How do we get behind equity issues? And how do we make sure that equity becomes real and meaningful in this country? I yield back the balance of my time.
I love it. I love it. No, that was some good stuff in there, because it's true. And you're right. We have actually made some strides. We have made big strides because, first off, not only are a lot more of African Americans finding themselves in elected seats, but we also see that there is a large advancement of African-American women who are breaking the glass ceilings in corporate America too. So you're right, there are some major strides that we are making. But the events that occurred are definitely real. It's so real that it's showing us, of course, there's yet work that has to be done. And so I'm going to wrap this up by asking you guys, and anyone can answer this, because of what happened, we know that leadership is very important. We knew leadership was important before Wednesday happened, right? And we all know that we want to be cognizant about who it is that we choose to lead and who we vote in certain offices to be our leaders. We all know, and if you come from a household like I did, you probably have heard words have power, right? And so sometimes we've also heard words matter in the context of political statements by folks. But really from spiritual Black families, it's your words have power. And so with that statement also comes the fact that because your words have power, of course they matter, right? So you want to be cognizant about what it is that you actually say because they have power. And we have seen that regardless of whether the person who speaks the words believe them or not, the words have power because words have a way of moving people. Words have a power of instructing people to do things and create certain contexts in their own mind that maybe the speaker never even thought of. So with that in mind, and based on the words that have been spoken by Trump over the last 4 years, from the start of him running for office through 4 years of presidency, and of course, on the events that occurred on Wednesday, January 6th, last Wednesday, why is impeachment necessary? He's almost out of office. Why is impeachment necessary? Would it even matter? Would it matter? Who wants to answer that before we go for our wrap up? Hands. Okay.
I think it's just, there has to be censure. I think there has to be something, even if it's for a day that he's impeached. His legacy is the rhetoric, the visceral, the hatred. Platform aside, Black folk have not felt safe because there's been a lot of this rousing up of all. We know it's been there. As Representative Boykin said, this is not something that's new. This is something that's happened since Black folks stepped in this country. But we've been fighting this battle and fighting this battle. And like him, I feel like I'm going to fight this battle until I don't have breath in my body, because I do want better for my children and my grandchildren. But at the same time, when you have someone stoking the fire and stoking the fire and stoking the fire, they have to be accountable. If I go to my job and do that, they're not going to just let me get away with it. They're going to write me up. I'm going to be on a performance plan. So how is it that now my tax dollars is going to pay for travel? My tax dollars is going to pay for Secret Service. My tax dollars is about to pay for a pension. I don't think that that's fair, because that wouldn't happen if I went on my job and stoked all this hatred, and then there was a riot on my job. I would be arrested. So I think there needs to be accountability, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking to see, do your colleagues and do everybody else in government hold people accountable for their actions? If you're going to hold me accountable for my actions, if I go out here in these streets and I do something, I'm going to be held accountable. So we can't have people at the highest level of government, as all of us as Black folk in this country, we witnessed what happened at that Capitol and how traumatic it was. As has been stated, it's not anything new. It's something that we've known, because we've seen lynchings, we've seen towns burned down. Pastor Thorpe is from Gainesville. Rosewood is like 20 minutes away from there. So we know that these things have happened. We know about Black Wall Street. These are not new occurrences. So the trauma is not a new trauma. It's just a wound, and it kind of put a Band-Aid on, and you rip the Band-Aid off and you put the Band-Aid back on. But the wound can never heal if we don't see people held accountable for their actions. And that's what I think this represents. Even if it happens on the last day, I feel as though it should happen, because it shows there is accountability. If you're the leader of the free world and you're the president of this nation, you have to be accountable for your words. And that's something that we need to see.
Absolutely. I agree 100% to that. Does any of our panelists have any final words that they want to share before we close out?
I just want to co-sign on that and say, look, impeachment does matter. And I think Trump ought to be impeached in the House and the Senate trial. And the reason being, he shouldn't get a pension from this country, and he shouldn't be rewarded for stoking the flames of racism and ignorance in this country. And quite frankly, he should be banned. And if he is impeached, he'll be banned from running again for public office at the federal level. And so that's why we got to impeach him, and we got to just get him out of here, make him just, he was the worst president this country has ever had. And so we just got to ban him into, non-existence.
Yeah.
And I want to thank everybody for their comments, because this has been a great panel. It's been a strong panel discussion. And I really admire you for putting this august panel together.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Dr. Jones.
Yes, I'm with Liz, and I'm with Mr. Boykin, and all of us. The one word that we've all said based off and I've been sitting here taking notes like I'm in school, is accountability. And so I want, if we could just take a step back, and I'm really focused on the youth, because as much as I say, like, I'm done working with children, it's something about the way they gravitate to me. And the conversations we're having it's simple. I had a student who said, why, since we're not returning to school, we're into third quarter, and I'm struggling because I learn, even though I'm a visual learner, I'm struggling with remote learning. But here we have a president who is, they've used some choice words, because when you create safe spaces, you have to learn how to accept people where they are in order to get them where they need to be. So if you find Dr. Jones to be a safe space wherever I am, then there are some conversations. Sometimes you're like, oh, it will blow your wig back, bald and all. I'd be like, oh my God. But I say all that to say that they are very vocal about how they feel in terms of the culture and climate of our world. And it's like, how am I being held accountable? I'm facing something I've never had done before, online learning. I'm trying to prepare for graduation. I don't know what graduation look like. I don't even know if we're going to have a graduation. All these things that you would typically have as you go through high school about, social emotional learning, boyfriends, girlfriends, friendships, all these things. And it's like, here I am, I'm being tormented in ways I've never been tormented before. But here we have someone that's supposed to be our leader. Like, that's your president, Dr. Jones. That's not my president. And these are some of the things that are coming out of their mouth. And these are 14 to 18-year-olds. And the gist of it all is accountability. And so even if that goes back to, a lot of times we live in a world of instant gratification, that we're only thinking about the here and now. We're not thinking about sustainable efforts. We're not thinking about, especially for those, if you're talking about impoverished neighborhoods, they're not talking about the conversations that Liz and I, all of us, are talking about in terms of tax dollars. Because they're like, how does it affect me? Right. So I think it goes back to having these type of conversations and having these type of platforms with individuals, like-minded individuals who come from different walks of life. But the gist of it all is accountability. And so I truly appreciate each and every one of you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Jones. Pastor Thorpe.
This has been phenomenal, and I agree 100% that at a minimum, it would be a slap in the face to any person who has ever been incarcerated for committing a crime to allow the President of the United States to not only invite people to the nation's capital. It's not like they just popped up. There was a stage prepared. He invited them there. Then to incite them while they are there, send them to the Capitol and tell them that he was coming too. For there not to be accountability for that egregious collection of actions would be a dereliction of duty for the country as a whole. One thing I do want to mention, and Sabanya, hopefully you'll take this back to a positive note after I deal with this bit of negative. Because of my upbringing, I started working very early at the age of 15. And by 16, I had my second job. My first job was as a waiter. My second job was as a mechanic. So I have spent the bulk of my formative years working around people who were non-African American. My early years in school were all in completely racially balanced schools until I got to the 7th grade. People need to be aware that there is a large segment of our population that has been preparing generationally for this season. This, what they have considered to be an ensuing or oncoming race war. They have been, for generations, they've been preparing for this. I've known people who had 2 gun cases. They had 1 gun case in the house that they put up front with their inexpensive guns, so that if someone broke in, they would break into that case first, but their real guns were hidden in another place in the house. I think it's important for average citizens to be aware that what we're seeing play out in DC has been generations in the making. And we need to be cognizant of that, with the idea that there are credible threats that we've been made aware of as late as today for attacks to occur on all 50 capitals during the month of January. We cannot afford to take those kinds of threats for granted. So I do encourage people to be vigilant, to be aware of what's happening around them.
Thank you so much for that. So, of course, from tonight, the hashtag word has been accountability. And I'm going to add one more to that word. And I want to leave this with credibility, because when Trump was running for office, he showed exactly who he was. He showed who he was prior to that. And that was one of the reasons why I actually launched the first book of JoJo's Legal Adventures that I talked about and opened up the show with, because I want to teach children that your words actually matter. Being credible is important, right? You want to grow up and have a reputation that positively precedes you. But when you do not think about what your words are and how they affect other people and how they will really change people, whether that's a positive or a negative thing, it can be dangerous. And we've seen this. I mean, we've been on the brink of possible war with the way Trump has used his words earlier in his presidency. And so I want to add to accountability, alongside with that, be credible and make sure that your words actually count for something good in this world. So I thank all of you panelists so much. You guys are amazing. And I'm going to say this again, thank you so much for taking your time out for this panel tonight, because look, this was like last minute, but it's a conversation that has to be talked about. This is one of the reasons why, not a reason why, but I've always wanted to be a lawyer, because injustice just never felt right to a 4-year-old kid. You know, even as a lawyer, I've taken on roles and volunteer positions. I'm actually on the board for Judicial Evaluation Committee, because I want to make sure people who are sitting in seats of power have everyone's best interest at heart, not just one subsect of the community. So do whatever it is that you can do, like Attorney Boykin said before. It's going to take all of us to make change, wherever that change is. You don't have to have this huge platform to do something so grandiose to make change, because one person can make a ripple effect that will impact the entire nation. But it begins with you. It begins with us. It begins with the education of your children, and not just education of keeping them inferior to their white counterparts, but education in the way that they can actually go out and help somebody else and educate somebody else and bolster somebody else to actually step forward and step out in their purpose and their passion to do good in this world. So I thank you guys so much for being here. Again, my name is Savanya DeBarros, Protector of Athletes. I am the founder of S.L. DeBarros Law Firm, And I'm so glad that you guys joined us for this conversation starter with What Are You Sporting About tonight. Have a great night.